Well, good morning, everyone. Just want to start out, just a show of hands. How many people have been injured from running, had to lay off? Wow, yeah, pretty much what I expected, right? Almost everybody at some point has to lay off running. I've been marathoning now myself over a quarter century. It's a little scary to say that, but that's the truth of it. And I've had periods, of course, myself, having to lay off from injury, and having experiences myself and dealing with different doctors, different orthopedists, different practitioners, physical therapists. What's interesting is that you find out that somewhere around 90% of all these injuries can be linked somehow to some core strength imbalance or inefficiency. So that's one of the things that we're really going to talk about today, because it's my belief, and the research is proving this out, that one of the main causes of injury in running is our lack of lateral stability, which leads to problems all up and down the chain. Now, as multi-sport athletes, all of you here have some advantage over just pure runners, and that is because you at least have variety in your training program. It's one of the strange things about everything, but sport in particular. To get better at something, you have to keep doing it, right? To be a better runner, you have to run. It doesn't matter how much racquetball you play, that's great. You have to run. That's called specificity of training. But the more you do one thing, the more you leave those weak links intact, and that will come back to haunt you. And the more you also increase your risk of repetitive stress injury. So what I believe in is a multifaceted approach to training that will strengthen you across different planes of movement, increase fitness in different ways. And this will leave you more injury resistant, better athlete, and you'll perform better. Now, as I said, being multi-sport athletes, you have an advantage already because you're doing that to some degree. But the thing is that you're still all focused, as you should be, on moving forward, right? You know, you get no points in triathlon for going side to side. Despite my own swimming technique, you know, I know that you are supposed to move forward. My swimming is actually awful. I'm glad I'm presenting on running, because I'm told that my swimming looks more like very slow drowning, and I'm working on that. But as a runner, you know, you're especially susceptible to problems with lack of lateral stability, because your body is under stress in all kinds of different ways in different planes. As a cyclist, you know, you still need strength laterally. You still need to pull from your core. You need strength in your hips. That's actually where I started feeling some weakness myself. I have these, you know, monster quads that I was born with genetically. My sisters hate that they're in the same gene pool and they've got these same legs. But for me, it works. So I don't really have trouble, you know, hill climbing. I can cycle for hours, but I start feeling, you know, fatigue in my hips. But still, that didn't really compromise my form. But in running, it's crucial to have this lateral stability. So what we're going to talk about today is the way, you know, you move when you run, and why lateral stability is so important. We're going to talk about exercises you can do to improve your lateral stability, about, you know, how you can incorporate this into your training. We've got a lot to cover. If there's time at the end, we'll also talk about some other related issues about form. A lot of people also ask, you know, the big sexy thing to talk about these days is barefoot running, minimal shoe running, and this ties into it as well. If we have time, we'll get to that. If you have any questions, if it's directly related to what I just said, you know, please raise your hand. I want this all to make sense. As I'm talking, you may not remember everything, but if what I'm saying doesn't make sense when I'm saying it, you're never going to have a chance at putting any of this together later. If it makes sense when I'm saying it, you can at least take away the conclusions, and later you'll say, oh yeah, Jeff said something about why I should do this, but I know I should do this. And I know it's a little ironic. I'm giving a talk about injury prevention, and obviously I'm a little battered. I'll assure you this has nothing to do with the running. I actually got hit while on my bike. So I'm looking forward to getting back out there running, but still, I can be injury-free running. Okay, let's just do a little exercise to start. We have to be a little careful with this since you're going to be standing on steps, but let's all just stand up for a moment. Okay, and do something not too difficult, generally, right? Let's just stand on one foot. Right? Okay, now this is where it gets a little tricky. Close your eyes. See if you can hold that for 10 seconds. See a lot of wobbling, people touching down. Generally not too bad. Okay, open your eyes. Okay, you can go ahead and sit down. It shows how closely linked your vision is with your what we call proprioception, your body's ability to govern itself in space. You know, DWIs, they have you touch your nose because proprioception is quickly compromised by alcohol consumption. It's your body's awareness of where it is in space and its ability to control that. It relies not only on visual cues, which is why it was so much harder, you know, to do it with your eyes closed, but also on your muscle control, on, you know, basically your balance. The neural connections between your brain and, you know, some of the different muscles throughout your body, especially in your joints and your ankles, will govern your ability to do that. Okay. Now think about how you look when you run. Running, of course, is always unbalanced. Right? It makes sense. You're always on one foot. When you're in the air, you're on the other foot. Right? So you keep shifting over. At no point during running are you actually evenly balanced. Right? So that means at all times you are in an unstable position, except for when you're in the air. But at all times when you're on the ground, you're in an unstable position. You've removed one of the supports for your body. Okay? Now what happens at that point is really crucial, not only for your performance, but your risk of injury. Because when you are on one foot, there's a lot of pressure that's moving out to reestablish your center of gravity over that remaining support. Okay? So that puts a lot of outward pressure on your hip. Now I'm going to tell you something. It may or may not sound familiar to you, but once I explain how it manifests, everyone's going to nod. Oh, I've seen this. Okay. What happens when you're on one foot and all that pressure is going out toward your side is the muscles on your outer hip, especially the gluteus medius right here, just behind your hip bone. This muscle, if it's strong, it's going to hold you in good position, right? If it's weak, it's not going to be able to hold your body, and your hip's going to collapse out. Okay. And what happens? You land on your other foot, and the same thing happens. If it's strong, you're held upright. And if it's weak, it collapses. So if you have weakness in your outer hip, if you have weakness in your gluteus medius, what happens is you get that wobble. And this is where you all nod, because you've seen it. You've seen runners. It's kind of funny. My wife always gets a kick out of this. Really, you turn your back and you shake your butt at a room full of people. Yes, I do. Okay. So you've seen runners. They run like that, right? Everybody's seen that? Another way you could check is you just look at the bottom of someone's shirt. And really, if you've got good running form, if you've got good core strength and good balance, it should be pretty even. Right? When you're running, it stays even. Otherwise, it looks like the ocean, flipping around. If you're not familiar with this, next time you go out running, just look around the people around you if you're doing, like the cherry blossom coming up. Look how many people like that. What you could also see is the way it manifests up the chain. And I tended to do that. I wasn't so much what I call a woggler. I was a rock and roller. Do we have any other rock and rollers in here? People who do this side-to-side thing? Okay, and that makes sense too, because think about what happens. If your hip comes out, right? Your opposite hip drops down. Your pelvis is now tilted. My spine is pointing off towards Mars, right? And so my shoulders have to compensate to keep me from tipping over. So my shoulders dip the other way. So I'm constantly doing that. So you see people doing this back and forth. The way it should look, ideally, is that your planted leg draws a line that goes straight up the side of your body and your hip stays in, right? Your unweighted hip should be up at knee lift, okay? Because the muscle here, the gluteus medius, is pushing your hip over, so naturally this hip rises with your knee. And it's one of those things that you've seen, okay? You've seen it because you've looked at people, and I know you've all done this, and said, God, that person's just running beautifully. They look so beautiful. Why do I look like a building falling down, and they look so beautiful when they run? You may not know exactly what the mechanics are, but you know what beautiful running looks like, and that's what happens. There's a store downtown in DC. Anybody gone to Pacers at Logan Circle? Have you ever been there? What I love about the store is that they have a big mural behind the cash register. It just shows the starting line of a race. And this just happened. I had a moment there, I guess, about a week and a half ago. There was a running group that was leaving from there. And we got to talking about all these kind of issues. And we were looking at, and it was a great cross-section of all the runners. We were looking at all the people at the start of this race that the photo captured that's up on the mural. And guy dead center, he looked great. The only thing, and it's such a minor thing, he was looking down. You should be looking up. They say run tall, right? But otherwise, it was great. His unweighted hip was up. It was a perfect line. His arm swing looked good. He looked ready to just go, okay? Whereas just to his left, looking down the mural, there was a guy who looked like a big S. His unweighted hip was down. His planted side, the hip was all the way out. And just like we talked about with the spine going out in one direction because of that pelvic tilt, his shoulders were all compromised, his arms all over. He looked like this, looked just like a mess. He looked very determined, which is actually the most dangerous combination. I know I've demonstrated that myself, to be, very determined and have very poor form. That's what gets us in trouble. And so I'm pointing and, gesturing to all these people. And the woman behind the counter, just leans forward. What are you guys doing? And so I say, well, I'm just pointing out different kinds of running form. I'm just saying the guy in the middle looks really, really strong. I mean, he just has very good form. She says, oh, that's Steve. He works here. He won that race. Ah, okay. So not only is this good for injury prevention, but it helps with performance because all your muscles are working the right way. And injury prevention, well, what happens when you have poor form? Well, here's what goes on. Everybody know what the IT band is? It's probably a bunch of knots. Iliotibial band, a thick band of connective tissue runs from your ilium all the way to the tibia, the outside of your knee. It just kind of holds, stabilizes your leg, also helps with leg swing. And when it's tight, and people have had ITBS, you've had tight IT bands, okay, it rubs on the outside of your knee. So if you ever have knee pain on the outside of your knee, in all likelihood it's due to tight IT bands. You could also develop pain in your hip. It could lead to a lot of different kind of problems. When your hip is all the way out like that, because your gluteus medius is not holding you, you're yanking on that IT band. That IT band has to travel a further range, a further distance than it would than if you were straight, right? You're yanking on it. And in a marathon, for example, you'll be taking some 40,000 steps, right? So imagine yanking on that same IT band like that 20,000 times, right? That's a lot of stretch on there. That's a lot of pain. Can lead to a lot of injuries. And this is also one of the reasons I'm not necessarily a fan of stretching. It might be a little controversial. I'm not necessarily against it, but we just have to be aware of, what it can do and what it can't do. Because as we've just talked about, if you have poor form, right, and you've caused all that stress on your IT band, and your IT band now is just locked up, to stretch it will help you, for a moment. Will give you relief just momentarily. But then the moment you go back out running again and your hips collapse outward, it's going to tighten right up again. The answer then is not stretching. The answer is to find out, well, what's causing the tightness in the first place? And a lot has to do with that lateral stability. Okay, so what's the answer to this? What should we do? Well, obviously build strength, laterally. And so this is where we get into a whole bigger chapter about strength training for triathletes, strength training for runners. This is a big part of what my book is about. Again, kind of preaching to the choir. I also talk a lot about cross training because I believe in building our big cardio engine, but not just pounding over doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. You guys are already doing that, so you're most of the way there. I certainly believe in in using cycling as cross training, even just for pure runners, because it directly translates into working complementary muscle groups in a manner that's non-impact. So it saves us from a lot of injuries. But if we can get our lateral stabilizers strong, then we can have better form, reduce the risk of injury from lack of lateral stability, and use all our energy actually in moving forward, which was the whole point. Okay, let's do another exercise. Let's stand up. Okay, this is kind of interesting. Just relax, take a deep breath. Okay, put your hand on your belly, very light, barely touching. Okay, barely touch your belly. Okay. Now pull in your abs, just slightly to move it away from your hand, just barely enough to move it away from your hand. Okay, got that? Okay, hold your abs in that position and move your hand away. Okay, remember that feeling that you've got now. Okay, you've engaged your transverse abdominis. This is what you want to feel when you're out there running. Hopefully this is the feeling you have all through your race. Okay, you can go ahead and sit down. When we think of abdominal muscles, everybody usually thinks about six-pack, right? Your rectus abdominis looks great at the beach. This is involved in mostly in just spinal flexion, right? Which means curling up. So I tell people, although it's nice to have a six-pack, and that certainly helps us, the most important thing that a six-pack does for us is gets us out of bed in the morning to go train. Other than that, it's not going to be deeply involved in doing the things we needed to do. Your obliques, the love handles a little bit more. We start getting some, lateral motion. But really what, does the most work for us, what's going to help, keep us stable when we're running, when actually cycling, swimming, and everything through life, is a deeper layer of muscle called the transverse abdominis. If you slice this in half like a tree, right, and looked downward, I'm not sure this is a great image, I guess, and look downward, and thought of your body in concentric, circles, you would see, deepest thing, well, the spine, then the organs, and once you start moving outward, the deepest layer of abdominal muscle is a transverse abdominis. It's just a big sheath of muscle that runs laterally across your midsection. Then on top of that comes, the rectus abdominis, the obliques, serratus anterior, all these other things. But it's that muscle that helps govern your body and balance it. Okay, so anytime you move, that muscle is going to be engaged. Now, what you just felt when you stood up was that muscle contracting, holding everything still. The reason I tell you that it'd be great for you to be able to experience that when you're running is that if you can engage that muscle, if you can consciously get that feeling, and it's a little tricky at first, but then not that hard, you do get used to it, that will pull on your pelvis and keep your pelvis in the right position. That will help improve your form, right? Your posture, okay? It will help with your breathing. It's a little bit hard to do. A lot of us run kind of, I'll say it because I used to do it, sometimes I still fall into it, mindlessly, right? You just run. You don't think about what you're doing. It's almost like driving a car with your eyes closed. I mean, you know what needs to be done, but you're not paying attention to what's happening. So what everyone should have is some kind of a checklist of things that they can control, that they should be controlling while they're running. Not to, keeping the analogy going, not to like drive your body like you would drive a car with, white knuckles, gripping the steering wheel. But again, just like you would drive a car, right? You look at the dashboard, check your speed, rear view mirror, side view mirror, checking everything around you. And then you look around and you keep going through that cycle every now and then. Same thing with your body. So one of the things you want to think of is see if you could hold that same position. Now, when you get started doing that, you could probably only do it for maybe a couple of moments during a run. And then slowly do it little by little, more and more. Eventually, it will feel almost like second nature. They'll be doing that in better form. Now, I can't guarantee that you'll have better times, but I can tell you at least anecdotally, over the past, say, 3 years that I've been working on this, that each of the races where I was able to maintain that for longer and longer periods of time have been some of the best races I've run, well, in many years. If you look at, like, I hate having talked this way now, age-adjusted charts. This is what I'm down to. I'm looking at age-adjusted charts. If you believe in those translations, I actually got my marathon PR 2 years ago doing that. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think that's very important. So you want to work on that. You want to do a lot of different kinds of core work. People do Pilates here. Anybody? Okay. A couple of folks. That's helpful. I like to do more targeted work. In my book, I lay out a lot of different things. Strength training as well. But we'll start, since we began talking about that, about lateral stabilizers. What we need to do then to strengthen the gluteus medius is at least do a couple of exercises a few times a week. And I need to pause here for a second and talk about strength training, because obviously I'm starting to dip my toe into that running. You thought that we were going to talk about running mechanics. It was only going to be about running. People hate, my endurance athletes I coach hate going to the gym. And I get it. I mean, you don't get into endurance sport to spend time doing other stuff. Runners want to be out there running. Even, swimmers, you got to get in the pool, you got to go to a facility, but then you don't want to go to the weight room, you don't want to do other stuff. If you do at least a minimal amount of these other activities, okay, it will spare you not only injury, but you'll do much better at the things that you want to do. But put it differently, how many people, well, we saw how many people had injuries. How many people had a layoff of at least a week from training because of an injury over the past 2 years? Okay, a week, okay. Probably even more than that. If you knew that doing, a couple of exercises, say for 15 minutes, twice a week, would have spared you that week off from training or more, then you probably would have done it, right? So it's an investment. Now, I've been injured. I know what it's like. I know, you've probably experienced the same thing. When you're injured, you get desperate and you're willing to do anything, right? It's crazy. If I told you, balance a tomato on your head and, and chew gum and, twiddle your thumbs and it will take care of your knee pain, you would do it. You would do it in a blink because you get desperate. And so you get, very good at following a regimented plan when you're injured because you want to get better. And then what happens? You get better and it goes out the window. You feel good. Well, I'll do it tomorrow. I only have an hour. I want to get in my hour's run, right? I got to make it to the pool. I don't have time for the gym. I don't have time to get on the floor, do my routine. I'll do it next time. And next time becomes next time becomes next time. And all of a sudden, the injury starts flaring up again. So I need you to commit to doing at least 15 minutes of this stuff twice a week. Okay, and it will help you. You'll get stronger. Your form will be better. I want you to go back and look at your old race photos. I hope you've kept at least some of them. And look at your running photos and look at your form. I would encourage everyone to get gait analysis, but at the very least, try and dope out, some of what we've just been talking about to see, if this would be something you would benefit from. look to see your hip position. With one foot off the floor, as we were saying, that unweighted side, is the hip high or is it low? If it's low, that should be all the proof you need that you really need to do this. Okay, so you don't need to do very much. Okay, I've talked about doing 15 minutes worth twice a week. That's not a huge commitment, but you need to do it steadily. So a couple of key movements that I recommend you do that we're going to talk about. Is anybody familiar with something called the Myrtle series? Wow, okay. Do you know what it stands for?
It rhymes with Myrtle Girdle.
That's all I know. Well, this is one of those mysteries. I've talked to a lot of different practitioners, talked to exercise physiologists, lots of other folks. It's MYRTL, okay? I don't know if it's an acronym. I don't know if it's the name of a researcher or a practitioner. Anyway, Myrtle series, and you could look it up online. It involves a number of different leg swings. It helps with hip mobility, but also strengthens some of the muscles of the outer hip. So one of the movements in the Myrtle series is just a front swing, right? Just like that, just like a nice pendulum. And that's great, and that loosens up your hip flexors. Doesn't do too much for your lateral stability, except you still have to balance, right? Everybody focuses on the leg that's moving, but the other leg has to balance. So anything that puts you in that position where you're standing on one leg is going to work to strengthen, your gluteus medius. Okay, so you could start with just a front leg swing. And incidentally, a lot of these movements are great for just a pre-race warm-up when you're just trying to raise your, body temperature a little bit, get the muscles loose, get some, lubrication in the joints. Great to do maybe one set of 10. For your purposes, probably 2 sets of 20 of each. Lateral leg swing. Now we're getting more closer to it because now we're engaging those muscles directly. So swing your leg across midline and out to the side. Right? Okay. And again, making sure to consciously keep that other hip tucked in. Don't get sloppy. Don't let it fall outward. Okay. What I also like to do are what I call standing hurdles. So standing again on one leg, just bring your knee around in a big circle. Okay, you get nice, good hip mobility, loosen up the joint, and also work the gluteus medius through a range of motion. Okay. And you could do those reverse. There are other movements involved in the Myrtle series. Some involve laying down the floor. You could look those up and see those. I do recommend those. You could experiment with that. But I want to move on to a couple of other things. One of the great strengtheners for your outer hips are lateral lunges. Anybody do lunges in their routine? Okay, do you do lateral lunges? Come on down. No, come on down. Now, this guarantees that nobody else is going to make eye contact with you for the rest of the seminar. They're like, don't look, don't look. Okay, so just turn around and face. Okay, so a lunge generally is just stepping forward, right? And back up. And the key is not to let your knee go past your toes. You don't want to have excess pressure on your knee. You don't want it to be, less than a 90-degree angle. So it's better to think of your body as dropping straight down, right? Rather than coming forward. It's coming down. So lateral lunges would be stepping out towards the side, right? Okay. Now what I want everyone to focus on is turning their foot so it's facing forward. Yeah. And coming out to the side and down. Try the other way. Good. I'm not going to be too brutal because I didn't notice when you were saying that you were wearing jeans. That makes it a little tougher. Well, thanks. Thanks for helping. And so that's really key to cue yourself with it. The toes have to face forward. If you turn your toe outward, then it's just a lunge, right? You're working mostly the quadriceps, which is fine. That's great. But you're not doing a lot for your outer hip. You got to turn that leg in, okay? Because now all the pressure is going to be on that hip and also on your inner thigh as well, on the stabilizing muscles, right? So you can step from side to side. Okay, now I will warn you that, I know we're all rough and tough athletes and, we can take a pounding. We're stubborn people. We're used to pain. We can do this. These are a lot tougher than you think. I remember talking with, with a physical therapist, and they were recommending doing start out with 1 set of 10. I'm like, and I'm listening, I'm thinking, that's not even worth waking up for, right? And, you got to do at least 2 sets of 20. So I wake up the next day, do 2 sets of 20, and the next day, oh my God. Using muscles in ways that you're not familiar with. Anytime you give it a different kind of stress to your body, it presents an adaptation stimulus. It triggers an adaptation stimulus, and your body will respond. If it's something your body's not used to, that's going to be kind of difficult. So some of these movements, you know, they may seem apparently pretty simple, and yet they'll have an impact on you. So these lateral lunges, definitely do them twice a week, but start cautiously and then build up to 2 sets of 20, and that's probably enough. What I also love to do is, and I recommend, talk about 2 more exercises, something, well, I learned it as a Romanian deadlift. Then a friend of mine went to Romania and said, nobody does it there. So I don't know why it's called a Romanian deadlift, but it's a one-legged deadlift. I have people familiar with this, but basically, and I get some nods on this, anybody grew up seeing, like, you know those dipping birds, those glass birds with the liquid in them? Yeah, the people who've seen them know what I'm talking about. Other people have absolutely no idea. But just kind of like a seesaw, and it just dips over, and that's what you need to do with your body. Okay, so you want to keep your body in a straight line from the heel up to your nose, basically, and you just going to dip over, just like that. Okay, it's a deadlift because you're going into a cantilever position, so it's working your lower back, but it's more of a balancing movement. Okay, and again, just like we were talking about with the lateral lunges, you got to think about your feet position, because here's what happens. If you come down and your toes are pointed down, right, your hips stay square. If your hips stay square, that puts a lot of pressure on your outer hip, exactly where we want it, right? Because the pressure will trigger an adaptation response, which means your body will resculpt itself to get stronger. This is the whole point of training, right? Training is about just stress and response. Stress and response. You create a stress through training, and your body has an adaptation, response, and resculpts itself to deal with that new stress. Then you raise the stress level, and you get stronger and better. If you don't stress the body appropriately, you either won't, get that stimulus, you won't get that response, or if it's too much stress, that's when you get injured. So we want to make sure that if we want to strengthen that area, we have to stress that area. So we do that by keeping the hips closed. If, on the other hand, you turn your foot outward, and it's kind of tempting because your body's more comfortable with it, your hips will open and you'll shift. And the reason your body wants to do that, the reason it's comfortable, is you're reestablishing your weight on your remaining support. You're centering yourself over, that open leg. And that's fine. I mean, you'll get some benefit from that. You just won't be working the gluteus medius, which is, what we really want to focus on. So, again, just like with the lateral lunges, you want to do the one-legged deadlifts, making sure that your body's position. These little things matter so much in terms of hitting the right muscle, getting the right thing done. Okay, another exercise I want to talk about are hip raises. Okay, pretty simple movement. You're going to lay supine, that is, face up on the floor, knees bent, feet on the floor, flat, and just raise your hips up and down. For those of you old enough like me, remember it's like the old Jane Fonda stuff, basically? That's what it's going to look like, just raising your hips up and down. As you push hips up, you'll actually even get a little extra benefit. You'll be getting a little stretch in your hip flexors, which is fine, but working through your gluteus maximus and gluteus medius. Now, there's a word that I think I've coined. I kind of like this: ambitialize. Okay, to take something and get more ambitious with it. Okay, and for every exercise that we do, there's a way to ambitialize it. And so the way we ambitialize this is create, again, some of that lateral instability and also put more stress on, each side of the body by raising one leg off the ground. You're doing a one-legged hip raise. But as with, everything I've been saying, there's a trick to it. Okay, when you're doing the hip raise, have the other leg straight out from the ground, but don't raise it up. Have it about an inch or so off the ground, and then push up through the hips. But that leg should stay stable. Okay? So what happens is that your glutes are pushing your hips up rather than having your leg pull you up in the air. This should not look like a leg raise. Don't swing that other leg up in the air. Try and keep that leg even and push the hips up. Okay? Does that make sense? So you should be looking at your foot, and the foot should be like an inch or so off the floor and stay there. Question?
Could you demonstrate?
Sure. Okay. Is that okay with the camera? We'll see. You just don't want me to look dopey, right? That's not the only reason. No. Just an added benefit. Okay. So, hip raise, right? Okay. One-legged hip raise. See, so not much movement. Okay, what I don't want is that. Again, that's fine. It's just not, really stressing the hips the way they should be hip. This is significantly tougher than this. Because this, when you're raising your leg up, you're getting momentum, from the leg, and that's what's helping pulling your leg up. Now, if you want to make it really tough, we don't have that available here. Well, at least not in the room with our facility. But everybody know what a medicine ball is? It's a rubberized, hard ball. Put your stable leg on top of the ball and try and do the hip raise. Okay, anybody have any idea why that would be harder? Want to hazard a guess? Well, there's some of that, lateral instability, absolutely.
Well, you're starting at a higher level, so you have to raise.
And you're starting at a higher level, okay. And I'll tell you, sometimes you have to just do something and see how it affects you. What shocked me with that is that my hamstrings were really engaged. And it was a really tough hamstring exercise, and I didn't quite get it at first. And the reason is that, you have all this weight pushing out because of the height, because of the lateral instability, and all the pressure going outward. And so you're locking your leg to hold it on the ball while you're raising your hips. And so you're really engaging your hamstrings. So incidentally, if you're ever looking for a hamstring exercise that, won't put you through a big range of motion if you're in recovery, or doesn't involve some machines that you see in the gym that you're not comfortable using, that's a killer exercise. Which leads to another point I want to make that we're going to start getting into about what else you should be doing in the gym. The last exercise I was talking about, using the medicine ball, demonstrated how you can incorporate different kinds of, muscle groups in one exercise and make it more useful, right? Get more of your body moving. And that's what I would like the rest of your routine to be. One of the methods of training that I've kind of been developing, for lack of a better term or seeing it anywhere else, I call it integrated dynamic resistance training. Okay, integrated, I want to incorporate a lot of different muscle groups, just like we were talking about using the medicine ball. Dynamic, I want a lot of movement. Okay, you guys are, athletes who move. It doesn't help you to stay static in a position, because your body is going to be used in motion, right? You're not going to hold a pose. You're out there moving. I want your body to learn to move together. I come from a strength training background originally before I got involved in endurance sport. And, I'm used to doing a bench press or deadlift. And that's fine as far as it goes, but I don't use that in life. My muscle groups, in hindsight, I think we're not really used to talking to each other. You know what I mean? When I start doing these more integrated movements, start doing more complex movements, my body learns to work together, like a team. For lack of a better way of putting it, I guess I just feel more integrated, really. So doing the one-legged deadlifts, and even some of the Myrtle stuff, you're asking your body to do a lot of different things at the same time. And this is what you're doing when you're running. This is what you're doing when you're swimming. This is what you're doing when you're cycling. And so you want your body to be functional in that way. Do people go to the gym? Anybody go to the gym? Anybody do regular strength training? Okay, great. So I want you to take these couple of principles with you as you go through all this. One, create instability. I keep harping back on this. If you create instability, you will strengthen your body through its lateral support. And you'll use your transverse abdominis and all the other related muscle groups. In any way you could introduce instability. Well, how do you do that? If it's something that you do, laying on a bench, instead of using a bench, use a stability ball. And everybody knows a big, round, inflated stability ball? Okay. If it's something you could do standing, okay, stand on a Bosu. One of those, they look like half domes, the squishy half domes, right? Or do half the exercise standing on one leg and half the exercise stand the other leg. Okay? Create some kind of instability. Also create some kind of rotational movement. I love cables. I'm starting to just really get enamored with them. There's so much that you could do with cables. And what I like is not just doing single joint movements, right, just like an arm swing, but doing these complex kind of twisting movements, okay, because that will involve hip rotation, which is where all power comes from all sport. Whether it's baseball, right, golf, same thing, tennis, swimming, it's all, my coach tells me, it's all in the hip rotation, right, and running, as well. People don't think that, people think running is, just all legs, but, your body is just churning, and turning, and getting strength and support from the core. So anything you do to incorporate that into your training routine is going to be helpful. So if you're going to work on back, instead of just doing a rowing motion, I love doing like twisting cable rows, right? So grab the cable, twist, twist. If you want to make it even more complex, you can do it from below and add a squat, right? Okay, and again, watch the feet, because you want the feet to face forward. If you turn out, you'll still be rotating, but you won't get as much rotation, you won't feel it as much in your core. And then you can do some crazy stuff. I've got one client, he takes this as a challenge, which I think is great. So we've gotten to the point where he's doing that, he's doing that one arm, twisting cable pull on one leg, and holding a dumbbell in the other hand. I mean, it's almost circus-like. I want to see if you could ride one of those little mini bicycles next, a little hat. But it's great stuff because he's working all through the core. Same thing doing chest. I mean, I just talked about chest press. Okay, well that's great, but that's not really helping me in terms of building overall stability and strength. But if I do it with a cable and I turn it into a punch, right? Now the hips are rotating, the core is engaged, the transverse abdominis is engaged. So, the first principle is to introduce, introduce instability. And the second principle is to introduce a lot of complexity. For every joint that you get, actively involved in exercise, you're going to be incorporating at least two muscles. The one that's doing the contraction and the other one that would govern, the negative phase, the agonist and antagonist. The more joints you get involved, the more muscles you get involved. You start getting the hips involved, well, now you're really getting your core strength involved and getting, some work on your transverse abdominis. So try and make things as complex as you can. A lot of different ways of doing this. To get instability, instead of going bilaterally with weights, if you use dumbbells or cables, go one arm at a time, right? So, even things that otherwise might be simple, like just a lateral raise, if you do it with one arm, now you're moving your center of gravity over, and you have to fight that. If you do it with one arm and one leg, okay, now it's even tougher. Ideally, you'll be fatiguing, what I call the outer muscles of the arms, muscles of your legs, but really what we're aiming to do is fatigue your core. And the more you can feel that working, the more you'll introduce, a stimulus to improve the core, which will strengthen it, which will make you more injury resistant. I know that you guys are doing a lot of training already. Anybody involved in multi-sport is doing a lot of training. It's hard to schedule it in. But again, if you do this pretty conscientiously and you're very focused about it, very purposeful, as I like to say, if you do purposeful training, it really should not take more than like 15 or 20 minutes total, twice a week. So we're talking, maybe 40 minutes tops, okay? Some of the stuff like we just talked about, you don't even have to be in a gym to do. You can do it at the end of your brick workout, whatever. Do your Myrtle series, get down the floor, do some side leg raises. Those are great. Do the lateral lunges that we talked about. Do the hip raises. Takes 5 minutes. It can be part of your cool down. If you go to the gym, do the cable work. You could also do the same kind of thing with some dumbbells. So you could do swings, right? Things like that, working your shoulders, your arms, but mostly through your core. And it's not going to take a lot of time. I'm a big believer in purposeful training. You guys are already very keyed into doing what you need to do to get to a certain place. You don't generally do random training. If you're targeted with this stuff, if you're doing it, the right way, in the right order, and diligently, it's not going to take a lot of time. This is the number one thing that I keep harping back on because, so many people fight back on this, push back because it's just going to be time consuming. It doesn't need to be that way. Any questions about all that? Wow, we're moving along. Okay. I want to make a real quick statement just about minimal shoes, because that comes up a lot with form. The big impetus for going barefoot or using minimal shoes is that it's supposed to help your form. So it'd be very hard to have talk about running mechanics, injury prevention, running form without talking somewhat about barefoot running. Does anybody run barefoot? Okay, and I see you've got the Vibram 5 fingers. Anybody use minimal shoes? Okay, good. Well, hopefully you've had good experience with this. I'll put it this way. It's harder to run incorrectly barefoot or with minimal shoes than it is to run incorrectly with traditional running shoes, okay? The reverse is not necessarily true. It doesn't mean if you're wearing traditional running shoes, automatically you're running incorrectly. okay? I mean, you look at the world's elite runners, they're not running barefoot, they're posting amazing times. Incidentally, they're also not necessarily running perfectly. And that also says something about the body's ability to adapt to what you do to it. The thing about running is that what you want to do, hopefully, is weight your foot when it's directly below you, okay? You don't want to heel strike, okay? This is, I won't make you guys do it because it's kind of painful, but you know, if you just want to have an idea of what, you know, what's so wrong with the heel strike, all you need to do is do a little jump, right? And you land on the ball of your foot, and then try it with your toes up. You can just see, okay. If you're barefoot, you would never run as a heel striker because it would just hurt too much. The thing with regular shoes is that you have all this padding in your heel, and it would enable you to do that, so you might be tempted. You can get away with it, okay? But if you think about, you know, about having proper leg turnover and proper foot placement, it doesn't really matter that much what you're wearing. I mean, I could be wearing army boots. If I've got the right cadence and the right foot strike, I'll be more or less fine. So you don't have to, you know, think that you automatically need to switch to, you know, being barefoot or using minimal shoes in order to run correctly. This is a whole nother conversation, but I just want you to think a little bit about it. Think about counting your cadence. Generally speaking, most of the best runners in the world at all distances do about 180 steps per minute. That's about, you know, 3 steps a second. That's a pretty high cadence. And if you're doing that quicker turnover, you don't have time to heel strike. Okay, so most of them land directly underneath. And that's what you want to do. So I focus more on trying to get that cadence and not worry so much about what you're wearing. If what you're wearing works for you, that's fine, you should stick with it. But otherwise, you know, just think about your cadence, think about strengthening the other things that lead to injuries, and focus more on that. If you got any further questions or comments about that, I'll take a quick question. The question is, would back squats help mitigate some of the, well, help, I guess, augment, you know, complement it? Not override it. You know, I mean, once you strengthen a particular muscle group, you've been strengthened. If you do other exercises to strengthen other muscle groups, that help as well. Back squats help a lot with quad strength, which will help with, you know, like kneecap stability, help prevent runner's knee, patellar tendonitis. If you look at some of the series that different physical therapists will have their patients with different problems go through, they'll go through a range of squats. They'll have you almost do like, you know, squats around the clock, you know, different directions. So, you know, adding more, I think, is beneficial. You strengthen yourself on different planes, which feeds into the whole concept of what we're talking about, not just working on one plane. So I think that could be a good augmentation to what we're talking about. I've been focusing more on lateral stability because that's where most of us have most of our challenges. And if anybody has any other questions or want to talk about it or want to take a look at my book, I'll be available after it. But thanks for your attention and thanks for being here.